Greetings, YouTube. Today I'll be reviewing the book Hershey by Michael D. Antonio. And his little sticker that was attached to this, it says, neither authorized nor sponsored by the Hershey Company. And it said the subtitle is Milton S. Hershey's Extraordinary Life of Wealth, Empire, and Utopian Dreams. And this is a exceedingly detailed biography of Milton S. Hershey. I also almost kind of wish that it covered more of the company, his corporation he founded, the town he built, than Milton himself. It went into a great deal of detail about that, but the author, I think, went a little long in the tooth when it came to discussing Milton Hershey. That's going to sound weird. I read a biography, but it seemed to just take too long to get to all of his points. Maybe you only show 3 examples instead of 6. Maybe just tighten this whole thing up together. Of course, the possibility is he handed this to a good editor and they tightened it up and this is as tight as it got. That could have happened. The author has another of other books, but the style is good enough that I'm still tempted to maybe read another one of them. What was the one of the other ones? I thought there was a list in here. Here we go. The State Boys Rebellion, Fall from Grace, Atomic Harvest, Heaven on Earth, Best Medicine with Mike Maggie, The Cup Dreams, Tour 72, and Mosquito with Andrew Spielman. So I may actually be able to attempt to read one of those to see if how well it works, and maybe read one of the ones that he wrote with another author to see if the author counterbalances his style. But this does cover every detail of Milton Hershey's life. It talks about his parents to a great degree. He goes into a lot of detail about his parents, his father, Herbert Hershey. And it talks about the Mennonite community he was born into, even though he himself was never a Mennonite. His father was never a Mennonite. In Mennonite society, culture, you don't become a member of the church automatically. Children are not automatic members. They have to become members on their own. His mother eventually became a member. His parents had a tumultuous relationship, which is a nice way of saying it. She married him because he was flashy and he was interesting and he was well read and such, but he also was directionless. He was always looking for the BBD, the bigger, better deal. And he chased that for his entire life until eventually his son just took care of him until he died. But because of that, the family moved around a lot. They didn't have the stability they needed. His parents eventually separated because even though neither of them was practicing Mennonites at the time, his mother was not willing to divorce him. So they never actually legally divorced each other, though they were separated after fairly early in Milton's life. And his father went gallivanting about, would occasionally come back into his life, to the detriment of him as an adult, because he would also drag him into business deals, which were often disastrous. For some strange reason, his father kept trying to create some kind of cough drop that would sell really well. Milton was disastrously apprenticed a couple of times, didn't work. Eventually found his way into a confectionery and discovered that he had a knack for knowing when sugar is going to crack, which is known as what gets to the point in the candy making process that you want the sugar to reach before you make your candy. It actually takes a certain level of knack to achieve this. And he failed spectacularly at business. He failed 3 times. His family stopped supporting him because, coming from Mennonite culture, family, they had resources. They were all farmers and such, but they had a resource. They were good business people, hard workers. But eventually they said, no, we're not backing anymore. And it was only through absolute and utter dumb luck that Milton Hershey succeeded. It was not because he was a genius. It was not because his hard work would not give up. It was that a guy showed up one day, liked his chocolate, moving through from salesman moving through from Britain, liked his chocolate, and Hershey took a gamble. The guy said, if you send me chocolate, I will get me a shipment of chocolate here, or candy. Rather, here it was originally caramels. Here, I'll pay you for them, and I think we can make a good profit because he was actually very good at making caramels, which I didn't really think about before. I don't ever equate Hershey with caramels, but apparently at one time that's what he was well known for. And he did it on spec. He got a guy in the bank to give him a loan. The guy supported him to the extent where he signed for it because he knew the senior bank people would not sign for this loan. He trusted Hershey. So Hershey sent this off. The guy didn't rip him off, sent the check back. Bingo, his business was off the ground. It was dumb luck. So don't let anybody tell you anything about bootstrapping bullshit. Dumb luck is going to be much more likely to succeed than anything else. And he made a fortune out of caramels. And eventually he realized that the caramel market was being saturated. So he decided he wanted to move into chocolate. The problem was that there was nothing in America. There was no such thing as portable chocolate that really worked. None of it had a good shelf life. It didn't have the right kind of texture. The Europeans had figured out, the Swiss had figured out how to make milk chocolate, but their method was laborious and a secret. So he worked at it, and he worked at it, and he worked at it, and he got to the point where he thought he could pull it off, and he took another gamble. He built a bloody factory without a formula for making milk chocolate. He built a milk chocolate factory without a formula for making milk chocolate. And during his experiments, during the construction, he pulled a guy in from his caramel works, which still existed. He had sold them off, but he was still, the company was still there. And he said, can you help me with this? The guy looked at the process, did this, did that, fixed it in one day. One day, this guy solved Milton Hershey's problem. Milton Hershey gave him $100 out of his own pocket, which was about $2,000 in modern times, or at least in the early 2000s, which was a nice bonus, $2,000 is $2,000, but yeah, no royalties, no raise, no promotion, nothing. Yeah, and eventually, because Milton could be vindictive, he eventually fired the same guy for doing something as egregious as having an affair. Yeah, Milton was a social conservative, even if he wasn't an active member of the Mennonites. So the Hershey factory got off the ground, and he decided he wanted to build a utopian community. Because for the time, Hershey was often considered progressive, but not as progressive as I consider progressive. For example, he was anti-union. He didn't like safety regulations. An employee put safety regulations, a safety device on a machine once. He built his own safety device. Milton saw it, had it removed because he didn't think it belonged there. He knew what it was. It was a safety device. He removed it. The guy subsequently crushed his hand, sued the company, and won. But on appeal, the case was overturned because the judge said, well, other companies have similar devices, and none of those devices have safety mechanisms on them. So it's okay if Hershey doesn't have safety mechanisms, which is an indictment of our legal system and an indication of why the private sector cannot be trusted with anything. Yes, I'm a socialist. Get used to it. Hershey made a killing. And he made them over and over again, and a lot of it was through just dumb luck. He got government contracts to make D rations for the military, which was kind of a super chocolate bar. Each had a 600 calorie output, and it had to be specially formulated because it had to have a really long shelf life in kind of any environment kind of thing. I have to look them up. I want to know if there's any reports what D rations actually tasted like. And eventually he made so much money he decided he could do some good with it, besides building his town. And he decided to build essentially a school, an orphanage, using family models. And so he would hire families to take in orphans, but he would educate them all at the same school, aimed towards agriculture and business. And he believed in this school so much, he essentially put his entire company into this school. I didn't know this, but the Hershey Company is actually almost all of the profits go towards a school for children, which is fascinating. Originally, the Hershey Park was open to the public. Anyone from the town could go to the park anytime they wanted to. Of course, now it's a huge amusement park like Disneyland. But at one time, it was just part of the community. Free a trolley that was subsidized. It only cost a nickel a ride. One day, a guy was walking. He saw me. He says, "Why are you walking? Why are you taking trolley. He said, I don't have a nickel. So Hershey gave the guy a nickel. The guy got in the trolley, and Hershey just smiled because that nickel was still his. He owned the trolley. He owned the streets. He owned the town. And Hershey's is still a company town, essentially. They tried to sell it in 2002. Unfortunately, the company, fortunately, didn't get sold because that would have wiped out 6,400 jobs in that town. Because I can guarantee you they would have either completely undercut the pay or just moved the entire facility to another country. And what would these people do? It's the only business in town besides the park. And suddenly having 6,400 people out of work would just destroy this town. I guess the vibe of the town has changed over years because the trust that's in charge of the school also built a research hospital. Apparently, it's a really good one, and it brought in a lot of professionals, which brought up the the overall level of education in the town. And the town had originally been for just blue collar workers, and so the vibe changed after Milton's death. Everything just kind of began to become less and less about taking care of the town because Milton wasn't there as a steward. He had a lot of wonderful ideas, and he implemented them in a way that was more successful than pretty much any other of the utopian ideas that came out of the 19th and early 20th century. But not only did he break a union setting in a strike, he sent in strike busters. He sent in strike busters using billy clubs made by a Hershey subsidiary of woodworkers. So he owned the company that made wooden things for his company. He had them make billy clubs to give the strike breakers to go break up a strike. That's evil. So he was a mixed bag of human being. And I guess that we all are now, aren't we? He was a fascinating man, and he did something that's, in my mind, unprecedented. What other corporation essentially exists to keep a school open? Eventually, they did open up the school to both boys and girls, and they opened it up to non-Caucasians eventually, because originally it was just white boys. And they also changed the program so that it was a little more geared towards the real world as opposed to agricultural and factory jobs, which are less and less common in the world, in America. I do wish the author had gone into more detail about the factory. For example, he never really talks about race relations in depth. He touches on it about there was ample racism against Italians in the community, and he doesn't really talk about the women's movement. He doesn't talk about the civil rights movement. He doesn't discuss the Stonewall riots and the impact on the community. What are the attitudes of the Hershey Corporation to the LGBT community? To me, those are things that I am interested in. I don't want just to learn about Milton Hershey. I want to learn about the institutions he created, corporation he created, and all of the aspects of how that corporation affects the culture and society in that community and the community it created. And I think the author could have pared down a bit of what he did with the topic, Hershey himself, and talked more about the community and the corporation that he created and how that fit into the 20th and 21st century. I guess I'm kind of would have preferred more of a Forrest Gump attitude to it, using Forrest Gump as a lens to look at our society over a certain time span, and in this case, using the Hershey Corporation and Milton Hershey himself to look at a certain aspect of a society at large. So maybe I was reading the wrong book, I'm not sure. But it was entertaining. I read it because I am from Pennsylvania. I had a relative at one time who lived in Hershey. She worked for the government. She worked at the Capitol. She was like the governor's secretary or something like that at one time. I have a fond spot for Pennsylvania, and I have a fond spot for Hershey, even though I know internationally people think Hershey chocolate sucks because it has a weird taste. That weird taste is a byproduct of the method that was originally designed by Hershey and his one-day assistant to create a milk chocolate bar. I prefer dark chocolate myself, and European chocolate I feel is superior to Hershey's, but I still have a fondness for the flavor, and I have eaten Hershey's on my one day of allowing myself to have chocolate on my birthday just because of that memory. So let's talk about chocolate. Let's talk about Milton. Have you ever read anything about Mr. Hershey? And do you have any fond memories of his corporation, his town, his park, or his product?